Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 170th edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And just a little change here. I've been asked, can we include the date of the recording? So the date is the 1st of December 2023. It's freezing cold outside here in the north. And I'm really delighted to say Sir David Carter has come back to join us. Hello, David.
Good morning, guys. Lovely to be with you. It's pretty cold down here as well, very frosty.
Yeah. Well, David was with us in September 2022, and we're delighted to have him back. And we'll sort of crack on with things, I suppose. But perhaps the first thing to do, though, David, there may be one or two people who are not familiar with who you are and what you've done. So can you give a little summary of that so that everybody's
Sure.
up to speed with things?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the invitation again. It's I really enjoy listening to the podcasts. So I started teaching in 1982. I did a music degree, taught music for many years, carried on being a music teacher even when I became a head. I was a head in Gloucestershire. My first headship in 1996, I think it was. Then I moved into Bristol to be head of John Cabot City Technology College, and then from there we eventually set up the Cabot Learning Federation Multi Academy Trust, which was, I think I'm right in saying, the first one in the Southwest. And we did that for about 8 or 9 years, and then became the Southwest Regional Schools Commissioner, and then latterly the National Schools Commissioner, which I left the DFE in the summer of 2018. And for the past 4 or 5 years, have been supporting trusts across the country, coaching and helping CEOs, but also doing things outside of education, going back to my first love of music. I'm a trustee at Centrepoint, which is a fantastic charity very close to my heart. And nowadays, we've got a lovely balance between a bit of work and a bit of play, which is how I always intended it should be.
Fabulous. Well, it's great to have you back. Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, excuse me, Coffee. The Elgin Marbles are the thing, or the Elgin Marbles, as our Secretary of State called them this week, has caught my eye. One, because it seems to be you don't need to get in a diplomatic row over something as simple as saying we've not changed our view on those, full stop. But also it made me think about, are they ours? Are they part of British culture as they've been suggested? And then, do we need to have the real things? Or could we have copies? Could we have facsimiles? Could we have plaster? But originally, the idea was that they would make plaster casts of the marbles, and we would bring in plaster casts. But in some very dubious dealings, it would appear, the Ottomans who ruled Athens at the time gave permission, although nobody's been able to find a record of the permission for these things to be taken from the Acropolis and the Parthenon, and originally taken to Malta and then to Britain to form a private museum, which is interesting.
Oh, right.
And it was only a costly divorce that meant he sold them to the British Museum.
It's funny because I know that the Prime Minister didn't meet with the Greek Prime Minister because I think this was the suggestion is that this was at the heart of it, and actually it did just bring it back to schooling. It triggered a sort of thought in my head about, isn't this the meeting that you don't really want to have with a parent? And actually, you're going to have to front it. You know that feeling when you're walking down the corridor and you think this could go either way. But actually, what you can't do is say, "Oh well, I'm not going to meet you now," and just turn around and walk the other way, leaving in effect the parent in the room. I mean, I think,
or even worse, say to your deputy head, "You take the meeting."
Yeah,
that's absolutely right.
Which is what he did, I think, wasn't it?
It was.
that's eventually what happened, wasn't it? He was offered.
Now, come on. Now, let me ask: has anybody done that?
Never.
No, I don't think.
No. I think staff look at you though, don't they? They know what's going on. I remember when I took on my second headship, there was a parent who was he had a bit of a reputation, and I was sitting in the staff room, and I remember the secretary coming and saying, "Oh, Mrs. Whatever is there," and all the staff said, "Oh, we'll be watching. And for me, I'd only just really been appointed. I think, a critical meeting. You know, you can do all these fancy staff meetings, you can have the most amazing curriculum, but confidence from the staff came following that meeting, that one little meeting. And this
staff want to know that you've got their backs, and I think that's you always do, but sometimes that's done very invisibly. If few people ever see it because it affects them. But actually, when you front up with an aggressive parent, or you deal with a really tricky situation or something that's gone wrong, and how you handle that publicly, I think that's how you get that level of support from people, because they take the view, well, if he's that good in this crisis, how good will he be when things are calm? And I think you're spot on about that. And I think that's the bit that for me undermines the Prime Minister's leadership, because time and time again, when the going gets tough, he gets a bit petulant, he gets a bit tetchy, gets a bit cross, like, how dare you talk to me like that? And if you took that into a meeting with a difficult parent in reception, I've got a pretty good idea how quickly that would end.
Yeah. I think those are the meetings that if you know in advance, you've planned the conversation several times the night before, and it never goes the way you planned.
Or you've planned to be at a meeting.
Yeah. I'm just thinking things like, then she'll probably say this, and I'll be able to say this, and it never goes like that.
No, never.
But more often than not, they're not. I mean, I do. I can reflect on times like that, Stan. But more often than not, they're not as bad as you think they're going to be.
Oh,
yeah, I agree.
You know but I suppose preparing yourself for the worst is probably the best way to deal with it.
But sometimes it's the other way, doesn't it? You have a meeting that you think is going to be okay, and there's no red flags coming at you, and suddenly halfway through the meeting you're thinking, this is like quicksand. This is slipping away from me. I didn't think I was. Why? How's this happened?
Yeah, I've had that one, and those are the ones that stick with you, aren't they?
Well, you just hope that there's no. I mean, I have to say, I can only remember one event, and I'm embarrassed by this, where I actually lost my temper, I think, with a parent, and unfortunately, it wasn't in the office. It was in a corridor. And it was at the beginning of school, so there were lots of parents around, and I do remember a teacher, not a very senior teacher, but just ushering me into my office, and it was all done, just with a hand, just on the back, and I thought, oh yeah, I shouldn't have done that, but actually I'm glad that somebody took control of the situation, gave me a chance just to calm down, reflect, what am I trying to achieve here.
Yeah,
I was taught two techniques for dealing with a cup of tea, or as the person who told me said, just go in the other room and rattle some cups and things around for a bit and give them a chance to calm down. And the telephone one, which is brilliant, when you get somebody really angry on the telephone and they blah, 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 just to say, I'm really sorry, I got called away from the phone then. Could you repeat what you said? The second time, it's really calm. Well, two techniques that I tell you do work. But the other thing I think is you've got to listen as well and show that you're listening. And sometimes agree with it. I mean, I remember taking the complete air out of an angry parent by saying, you're absolutely right. That shouldn't happen in our school. And then I'm going, well, that's the first thing I'm going to find out is if it did happen.
Yeah.
And then we'll go from there.
Somebody told me, Stan, that also after these meetings, it's quite good a couple of days later to contact the parent and just to sort of have this conversation that says, did you feel as though the matter was resolved? Have you noticed things are getting better? I think that's also sort of feeling as though it's not sealed off at that meeting. There's a reflection period for you as a leader as well.
Not John to come back in for round two.
But it might be.
I think what's interesting there, I think what you said there is really, really smart. I think that's a very good thing to do. But don't you think that it's got tougher in the last couple of years with families and with parents who previously wouldn't have ever criticised or looked for a row, but are so frustrated by the way that life is dealing them a hand at the moment that there is no figure of authority they can shout at other than a head teacher. And certainly in the schools and the trust that I'm continuing to work with, there's stories of parents just getting completely irrationally angry because it's the last straw or the final straw. And I think that's a really big burden for heads to cope with. And certainly through coaching and mentoring work that I do, it comes up all the time about, you know, how we have to do. I should definitely say Dan's two points there, because I think they're really good ones. But I think the world has changed a little bit in the last couple of years, and it's reflected in, you know, poorer attendance and poorer behaviour. And I think heads are in the front line of that at the moment. I think it's become quite tough.
Yeah,
I think also dealing with sort of complaints as a governor, which I've done more of the last 2 years than ever before, it's a level of professional parents that are complaining. It's not the angry parent whose son's had a fight or whatever. It's you know, we have long debates and letter writing over absence through going on holiday, and
yeah,
you know,
I think though, I'm not. We're not going to talk about the COVID inquiry today, but I think there's something here, isn't there, around authority figures who I think in the past people looked at as being sort of highly professional, considered. All of this is continually chipping away all the stories around the backstories about what actually is happening, and I think that's eroded the level of confidence in the word professional, you know. And I think that there's a sort of, we need to get back to a much more sort of civil, sort of, hopefully, you know, more considered government, you know, in terms of the way that things are done. And that doesn't mean to say that everything's right, but actually at least people have a greater level of confidence in the decision making process. I think this has chipped away quite a lot in terms of people's feelings about people in authority, whatever position they're in.
we need more ministers for common sense.
At that point, we move on.
yeah. That's
David,
another podcast then.
David, what's caught your eye this week?
So this feels a bit like Room 101, doesn't it? The first thing I put into Room 101 for what I've caught my eye this week is minimum service level agreements, which I suspect will never, ever see the light of day. But it's an opportunity for the Secretary of State, I think, to posture and show that she's being tough and to impress Number 10. Because I think she's still a little bit on the naughty step after her swearing spree. And I think she just wants to show that now Suella Braverman has disappeared from cabinet, she can now be the ones that takes on the trendy, lefty, loony teachers. And so I think there's an element of that. But the insulting thing about it for me is that there've always been something called minimum service level agreements. We never called it that. But when there is strike action, or when there is a snow day, or there is, even though the pandemic's not a bad example of it, heads and schools bent over backwards to make sure that vulnerable kids were supported, that children in exam year groups had the teaching that they needed, before we even thought about online learning, which is another part of the solution. And so it really bothers me that what I see as the breakdown in trust and confidence between the government and schools, and probably people in the NHS would say the same thing there, but in schools in particular, this doesn't help that. It just breaks it down even further. And it just feels to me that it's an example of, you know, should there be a change of government, there'll be a leadership race. I've no doubt about that, and I'm sure Gillian Keegan will see herself as a candidate, and this is her positioning herself around that. So, I think, from my point of view, I've always believed, and I think I probably always will, that there is a right to take industrial action. You know, if you feel that's not right, then there's another debate about what steps could you take to avoid that.
Yes.
And that's another political question, I suppose. But the idea being that the answer to industrial action is minimum service level agreements, which puts heads at conflict with their staff, which is why I think legally that's suspect. But the idea that you or I, if we were still, or Stan, we were still doing our headships, would have to suddenly sit down with a spreadsheet and work out who can go on strike and who can't, is just absurd. And it's just another example, I think, of how this government has just run out of steam where their education is concerned. They're picking the wrong fights. So the Prime Minister picks a fight on the marbles. The Secretary of State picks a fight with teachers because she's lost fights with unions, so she's going straight into heads. And I think that for me, it isn't going to happen, because by the time there are appeals in the High Court, we'll be through the election and whatever will be. But I think I'm really worried about the fact that, you know, people who are thinking about teaching as a career and reading social media, reading the Ofsted inquiry into what happened at Caversham Primary, reading this kind of stuff about minimum service level agreements, going, do you know what? I'm not sure this is the career for me. And it's just another erosion of public confidence in what I think is one of the greatest public sector services we provide.
Yeah, I agree.
I just thinking of times when, you know, if you take snow days, for example, my school's out in the hills, and most of the parents were commuting into Manchester and the like. So if it snowed during the day, there would be this mad panic of parents putting themselves at risk trying to get back to school. And I sent a letter out to say, look, I will stay in school until every child has been met and gone. Even if it's 9 o'clock at night, I will still be there. Do not put yourself at risk. Because there was this theory that schools would just close and you'd send the children out into the snow to look after themselves. And it was just never going to happen because nobody does that. I even had, and this is probably going back to a long time ago, teachers from other schools who couldn't get to their schools turning up on the doorstep and saying, "Can I help?" You know, I think there was a rule at some point that you should do that, but it was fantastic that somebody came and said, "Can I help?" at 9 o'clock in the morning when some of my staff hadn't got in. It was, that's part of being, for me, that's part of being a teacher.
That's how you show your professionalism, isn't it? You know, your commitment to your community, you know, the desire to teach children. It doesn't matter who they are. You know,
but that leadership in the community is vital, isn't it? I mean, you know, we saw it in the pandemic, but that is for me how you demonstrate the position that you hold within the community that you serve, and of course delivering education and standards, that's very important. Of course, it's vital, but actually there's a more, I think, equally important service that the head teachers provide that probably in some communities back in the day would have been provided maybe by the church, but as that's slightly been eroded in some parts of the country. You know, yes, we're an authority figure and therefore it's easy to have a pop at us. But at the same time, actually, people do look to head teachers for exactly the way the stand that you described it, to be that support. I mean, I'm going back to the point you made a moment ago about, you know, that follow-up call when you've had a row with a parent. Yeah. Often what happens in that follow-up call is not the incident that sparked it all off, but something else they're really worried and upset about that probably drove that behavior.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you really want to be a credible leader in the public sector these days, you have to put yourself in those positions, I think.
Yeah.
What's caught my eye this week? Well, there's some research out, just for people who are not familiar with how bursaries work. But in order to try and attract particular teachers in particular subjects, the government has undertaken two sort of approaches. One has been give sort of quite a large lump sum at the beginning, somewhere in the region of £27,000 for a maths teacher. And then actually that draws them in. And there's another approach, which is make that amount smaller at the beginning, and then at the third and fifth year, give a top up. So they in effect get a bonus for sticking at it. And so the researchers found that giving, as you can imagine, giving a big sum of money at the beginning draws people in, but it's not so good at keeping them. Having a smaller amount of money at the beginning doesn't draw quite so many people in, but does keep more for longer. And it's really, you know, where we sit in terms of bursaries. And I think the point for me when I was looking at this was, I'm not sure how I would feel as a sort of mid-career teacher in a science department, shall we say, a maths department, and thinking, you know what, there's a 24-year-old over there. They've rocked up and they're actually earning more than I am. How, you know, and I'm really struggling. You know, I've probably got to the point where I might have got married and might have got the mortgage. We might have just got children. And here's a sort of, I'm not caricaturing them, but somebody who's hasn't quite got those responsibilities, hasn't got anywhere near the level of experience, may not be delivering the quality lessons that I'm delivering, but actually they're £27,000 more than me. I don't know how you cope with that. And I think for me, you know, there needs to be a look at what is the whole package. The bursary itself is probably saying there's something wrong with the overall package around how attractive is teaching. End of story.
What do I say as a primary year 6 teacher who teaches maths and science at the same level as the year 7 teacher does in the high school, and no thought of any remuneration, particularly for me?
No, because it's in primary PE, a little bit of history, I think, where the targets are actually being generally met, but most other subjects we're way down. I mean, have you got a take on that, David?
Yeah, I agree with you around this. I mean, the history of this that I saw when I was working in DFE was, and you guys will remember this because you were up in the Northwest, there was a real school of thought was that we'll get teach first people who live in London to go and do missionary work in the North. And surprise, surprise, they didn't want to do it because actually their families, their relationships, their life was somewhere else. And so that didn't work. And then we got into this idea of that big slug of money at the beginning. I mean, there are a number of problems with it. One is that cost is ongoing. It isn't that you pay them 30 grand in year one and then they go back to normal salary. So the school has got to bear the cost of that forever as long as that teacher is there. So it's an ongoing financial commitment. And we know that teacher pay is an interesting area of development for the government anyway. But also, you see your point about the experienced teacher. So that experienced teacher in their mid-30s, who's now maybe have a salary that's not that competitive anymore, is now being asked to mentor that young teacher because they're not very good. And so the whole thing, teaching for me is a team sport, always has been. And you have to think about the way in which you develop that team. And so for me, I like the idea of there being a package of which money might be part of it. Professional development around master's courses, a sabbatical of some sort. I think there's something that for every 5 years of service, there is an offer that is made to people irrespective of the stage of their careers that they're at. I think at the other end of the spectrum, I think I read 40,000 teachers left the profession last academic year pre-retirement. 40,000. That's more people than you're going to see at Everton this weekend. And so it really bothers me a little bit about how we're putting all our eggs in the basket of recruitment. We're not thinking enough about retention because they're two sides of the same coin. We have a recruitment problem because we have a retention problem. And so I think the idea of how do you reward experienced teachers, and yes, that might be money, it might be a one-off payment, but I think there are other ways that we can do that as well. And for me, a secondment doesn't have to be like a year or 6 months. It could be half a term to go and do something that you're really interested in exploring. But we seem to have a very binary view to this. And you're right, the data suggests that I'll take my bursary, whatever it might be, but there's no expectation that if I quit after 2 years, I have to give it back.
No. Yeah. I think the other interesting thing about longer term teachers was there's a tweet this week where somebody put, I've met a lot of people now who've left the profession. None of them have mentioned the pay as the reason. Yeah. It's workload, it's lack of respect, it's expectations beyond what I can do that's driven them out of the profession. And I'm with you, Dave. I think a sabbatical, even for a month, a month away to do some study or to go and visit education in another country or something like that would be a fantastic reward.
There is also, Stan, a complete lack of flexibility. I mean, the numbers of, and again, the numbers of women leaving during their 30s and 40s, because whatever the reasons are at home, but actually it feels as though the burden of family life hasn't shifted in some families to the extent that they can actually keep all of these plates spinning at the same time. And actually there's a lack of consideration around, sort of health issues that women are going through during that period. There's a lack of understanding, I think, around some leaders about what the pressures of actually bringing up a family and doing more than a full-time job. And some people might say, well, actually perhaps people shouldn't be working full-time. Well, let's have that consideration. But actually there's a certain sort of some leaders seem stuck in particularly, I come from a primary background. I can hear primary head teachers, and I can feel it with people that I know who are simply not aware of the fact that they're so close to losing a member of staff they've had for 10 years, who's bloody good, parents respect, and you're losing them because you can't find a solution for why she needs to come in late on a Thursday or leave early on a Friday. There's just...
No, I couldn't agree more. I absolutely agree with that. I mean, and it's all wrapped up in that kind of conversation about flexible working, isn't it? And if you think about, I think about my lads, they're in their late 20s, early 30s now. They no longer have to go to work in a place. They do it for 2 or 3 days a week, and they work at home for 3 days a week. And if you're thinking about someone coming out of uni, 23, 24, 25 years old, they have an expectation that they can work in a different way. And I don't think that's easy to do in schools. So for me, the antidote in schools is we look at flexible working across a career, not here right now today, and recognize that as you go through different phases of your life, whether it's your family circumstances or you're as you say, you're buying a home, or you want a break, a career break, or you want to do a condensed day, or whatever else it might be, we need to be open to that. Otherwise, we are going to lose good people, without a shadow of a doubt. And that's not 20 years down the line. That's happening right now.
Yes, yeah.
I think there's still an element in some school leaders that I've met who say, "Well, we had to stick through."
Yeah.
In my day, I did. We muddled through at times like that. Well, times are slightly different now.
Yeah, they are.
And are you saying what you muddled through was the right way to do it? No.
Well, I
think different.
I find it interesting the way that, and I'm doing well. I've got another month to work in Blackpool, but about a year ago, I reviewed all the vacancies, all the adverts for Blackpool teaching jobs, and something stuck in my mind about I was thinking of it as a London teacher going to Blackpool, and what is there? What are you offering me that makes me want to come? And actually, I was quite disappointed with a number of the adverts. I can say this because I've told people, just some of them are just not considering, how can we make the post more attractive? And actually, the benefits, the flexibility is all part of that attraction, isn't it? If you're sort of coming from the south to the north, most of them had no reference to a relocation package. None of them spoke about, settling in. I mean, one of the things for me was, a loan facility for rentals, so if you were getting a flat, you might not have the money for a 6-month deposit, we'll give you that. All of this stuff is just, for me, is central to how you can attract people to a place that's difficult to attract people.
When that debate about that particular policy was being discussed, I remember chairing several round tables to try to understand what the resistance was to it. And one of the things that people said that they would make them think about it was if they could spend 4 nights a week at home, i.e. back in the south, which by definition meant you would teach in the north Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Monday through Thursday. And because the critical mass of the week would mean you wouldn't be away from your family or your friends or whatever, but they would consider doing that with the appropriate help with the rent or with accommodation or whatever it might be. And when that was presented to ministers, but also to some of the leaders in those areas, it was, well, we can't timetable that.
Yes,
well, I don't like split classes. I don't we know they've got to be there 5 days a week. And thinking these people are beginning to say yes, they'll think about it, and you're just putting up another barrier.
Yeah.
Back to Shackleton now, Frank. His advert, which was basically, you'll probably die.
How many applied?
It was oversubscribed with people applying.
We're coming to a close, but actually I'm keen just to sort of talk about something I think dear to our hearts, actually. I started playing the guitar again when I was 60. I still have my lessons every 2 weeks. A big shout out to Chris Hemingway, who's a fantastic guitar teacher. And I know, Stan, it's in your family with Paul and everything,
Paul's a qualified music teacher, although he works now as a TA. He's just sent me a video yesterday of the band, the school band that he's organising, and you listen to it and you think that's progress from last week.
But just to say, also, it's Paul that composed the theme music to this piece. But David, you mentioned before you were a music specialist. So, I mean, where are we with music in schools?
Yeah, I think I worry about it, I must admit, because I think I see more and more secondary schools. I'll talk through a secondary perspective for a moment, although I think my comments are equally applicable in primary. But I think in secondary, the squeeze on the curriculum around academic EBAC subjects has meant that music has become a subject which has been either relegated to a carousel model. We'll do a rota every 6 weeks with other subjects, or it's not there at all, or it's an extracurricular thing, which schools, it's a nice to have. But there is no doubt in my mind that if you want strong bands, to use Stan's example a moment ago, you have to have it in the curriculum. You have to light that spark in the classroom in a music curriculum. And I just wish we would. And I think I think a Labour government would look this way at the arts, because I've heard Keir Starmer talk about the impact of the arts on the economy and the potential of that. But I do think we need to revisit the role of music in schools and how we go back to a time when there was entitlement of a music curriculum all year for all year groups. And I think the thing that sparked in my mind that view about that was so. I had a birthday this week, and Claire, my wife, bought me a beautiful print of one of my favourite paintings, which is called Norham Castle Sunrise by Turner. And one of the reasons why I loved it was I used it in a GCSE composition project back in the 1980s as a stimulus. And then I wrote a book on GCSE music, and it's in there. So I've always felt a real affinity to it. But the point I wanted to get to was, so I put a photograph of the printout, and I reminded on the tweet that, you know, I taught that I'd written this book in 1987, blah blah blah, and I had a tweet back from a person who was doing GCSE with me in the 80s, who's got to be either late 40s or 50s now, who remembered the project. They remembered they remembered the postcards, because I bought a pack of postcards of the painting, and we used it as a stimulus for a composition exercise. And he remembered it, and it just made me think. When I think about my memories of school, I think about sport, I think about music. I don't think about assessment for learning. I don't think about a starter activity that somebody did with me. And the experiences that the arts often give you are ones which stay with you forever. And he was a good example of that. So, you know, it just made me think about, you know, if we lose music from our curriculum, I don't think we'll ever get it back, because it's a lot easier to lose something than to start something up. And so I just hope that we haven't reached the point where it's too late, and that over the next 5 to 10 years, there's a resurgence of the role of music in schools.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, what's in my head, I don't know if these chats just trigger something, but I remember a year or so ago being drawn to a short video of a school, primary school, where a teacher decided that they were going to introduce music, and it was across all year groups. It was going to have instrumental work as well. So she created an orchestra, and so you had a group of sort of 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds in this orchestra. And I have to say, when they played their first piece, it sounded awful. It sounded awful. But what was so wonderful was that all the parents at the end of the piece all stood up and applauded.
Yeah.
You know, and there's something, isn't there? I remember playing the euphonium to us in a school orchestra as the head. But there's we said before, that sense of being in that team and not wanting to let anybody else down in the team, and you're having to concentrate because you don't want to be the one making the bum note on your own. You know, all of that stuff is part of what you're bringing.
But people want to belong somewhere, don't they? People want to feel they belong to a tribe, to use that awful phrase. And sometimes in schools, you don't fit in. You're not in a cool group. You're not a sporty kid. You know, you're academically okay, but you find your niche in something like drama or music or dance or wherever it might be. And if we block that avenue off, that's another niche of belonging that some children will miss out on.
Yes.
Yeah, I can remember the peripatetic teacher who used to come in and do music in my school, who said, you know, why don't you get a band together? And I said, well, we've got like 4 brass players, a flautist, and she said, but how many of your, you know, it's a middle class school, how many of your children have music outside of school? And I kind of said, I honestly, I don't know. So we just sent a flyer out to say, if your child plays a musical instrument and wants to be part of the band, this peripatetic teacher agreed she would come in after school to put it together. And suddenly I had keyboards, I had drums, I had all sorts of, and as you say, Frank, the first 2 closed doors, if you listen to it through 2 closed doors, it's definitely slightly better. But I mean, that school band ended up with 30 odd children in it, and it played me out when I left headship. The band played me out, and I was really pleased about that. Really, you know, considering I think I bought the first cornet, a governor bought a cornet, and we got a trombone from somewhere, and that's how it started 4 or 5 years previously. And to have this pleasant noise, let's say, pleasant sound happening was fantastic.
Yeah, I do remember going to a primary school in Leeds that was linked into the university's orchestra, and they you know, the head teacher was absolutely adamant every child in that school was going to have a chance. You know, it wasn't just you're going to get the violin, you know, because the violin might not be your instrument, but you're going to have a chance to find an instrument. And that, you know, that after just 2 or 3 years, you know, what was being developed in that school was amazing. And a big shout out as well to the Liverpool Orchestra that's working very closely with some of the primary schools in the city to ensure that every child has the chance, you know, because I mean, my secondary was quite a nice area, you know, similar sort of situation, Stan, but it's the kids who haven't got those opportunities at home we need to be really offering this to.
I think the Sun School are going to Manchester next week, I think, with the Royal Phil as choirs singing, which again is another opportunity. My heart sinks for the schools though who don't either don't get invited or aren't at that level that they push going to something like that, because those are the children again that I think probably extremely talented. Their chance of life might be through music or through art or through, and the doors closed even at age 9 and 10.
Well, we've had Kevin Edward Turner, a student from my primary school, who had a very troubled upbringing, and he had a week working in a residency with the Northern Ballet Theatre Company. So now he runs a dance company in Manchester. That was his outlet. You know, he's incredibly grateful. He's been on here. He's shown that gratitude for the opportunity we gave him. It's humbling, really, when you think it's just a week. You know, you think I've changed somebody's life, and his wife, and his 2 children. You know, from where he was in Partington to where he is now. You know, it just makes you. It's heartwarming. It's the reason why you teach, isn't it?
If the music hubs come to an end, which is a risk in the Arts Council, you know, I know in where I was, because the music service came under my portfolio, there's a warehouse full of musical instruments, and I literally mean a warehouse full. Mainly keyboards, hundreds of keyboards, because nobody wants to store them in school. But I just wonder, will we see sort of a sharing out of those things? If that's the same in all the hubs, will we get the musical instruments back into children's hands?
Well, that'd be a start, wouldn't it?
It would.
Yeah, it would.
Dave, before we finish, you're a trustee of Centrepoint, aren't you? And one of the things we do, we don't pay David for this, but because he's generous in giving his time, we do offer a donation to Centrepoint. But busy time of the year for the charity.
Yeah, it's a fantastic charity. I've been a trustee for 6 years now, and I absolutely love the work. The mission of the charity is to eradicate youth homelessness for 16 to 25-year-olds, and there are Centrepoint foyers accommodating up to about 1,300 young people every night of the year. Obviously in London, but also in Bradford, in Doncaster, in Barnsley, in Sunderland, in Manchester, and it's just the horror, I suppose, of how homelessness has increased in the last couple of years. You know, the routes into homeless are usually domestic breakdown, substance abuse, you'd expect. In some cities, it's gang stuff as well. But these are 16 to 25-year-olds who've all got a future, who've all got a potential, and they just need so much help. So yeah, it's a piece of work that I really enjoy doing. And you know, anybody who knows anything about Centrepoint, if there's an opportunity for very, very small donations on the website, which I think I remember seeing that it's about 140 quid a year to sponsor a study room, but it's something like £17 a year to provide some other facilities. So you know, yes, of course, there are really big donors to whom Centrepoint are incredibly grateful for the work they give, but also it's a very, every penny counts is basically my message around it. So it's a wonderful organisation, and I care deeply about it, and care deeply about the challenge that we face with it. So thank you for giving me the chance to say that.
No, that's great. Well, thank you.
I'll put the details at the end of the.
Yeah, I'll put a slide on with
link,
the link.
Cheers, guys.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, David. Love to have
Thanks,
you back.
David.
I mean, just somebody like you coming on the chat makes such it lifts us. It really does. So thank you.
I love it. I love the fact that we don't talk about all the usual stuff.
Okay, well, thanks everybody. We have got a colleague who's been on before next week, Samina Chowdhury, who has written a book about equitable education. So Samina's coming back, and then we have one final week before Christmas. So all being well, we'll see you all next week. So thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, David.
Bye.